Andy's second mission is a little more complicated than some of the other ones, but it is really, really easy. And this here is Lash, the second of the Black Hole Commanders, and I'll really talk more about her once we actually get to fight her. She's basically the inventor slash strategist of Black Hole. And you'll see one of her creations here. It's pretty hard to miss it. It's sort of the main gimmick of this mission. Yes, there's an extremely large cannon. And yeah, we don't want to leave something like that around. Now, interestingly, Max is better than Andy at destroying cannon. And later on, when we see missions where you need to destroy structures in order to win, I like to use Max for those. But of course, we have to do this one with Andy. And it is pretty good to have Andy for the first mission where you get to create your own units. Because of course, he can work with anything, really. Yes, and of course here is the tutorial on producing units yourself, which you will need to do in quite a few missions. So basically here I'm going to talk about just general tactics in missions like this. Since this situation is quite similar to a lot of the War Room ones and most standard games, a lot of these tactics I'm going to talk about actually do apply in these kind of standard games and often multiplayer situations as well. Yeah, so basically, the more properties you have, the higher your income is going to be, and by extension, the more powerful the units you're going to be able to build. Which means that it's really, really useful early on to produce lots of infantry and transports and try and expand your territory as quickly as possible. Of course, Days of Ruin has bikes for that exact purpose, but in this game you'll have to make do with APCs and transport copters. Okay, so here we already start off with a transport copter, but I'm going to use it for something a little later. Now, the reason why I said this mission is very, very easy is because if you look up at Flak's territory, he only has one base and one city. So his income is really, really pathetic. He's not going to be creating very much very quickly. And in fact, his army never really poses that much of a threat to you at all. In fact, really all he can create throughout the whole game is infantry and the odd transport or two. That's really all he'll ever have access to. And as they said there, the cannon is not ready yet. Yeah, checking the range of cannons is extremely important, because later on we'll get to missions that have multiple cannons, and you really don't want to accidentally run into range of one of them. So yes, very, very large range. I'll explain more detail about exactly how it works later on. But now, firstly, yeah, as I said, creating infantry early on and using transports to get to far-off bases is good. Now, another tactic which is very useful in these kind of missions is looking for far-off bases that you should prioritize. For example, in this mission, see that base on that island in the middle of the map? Whoever captures that is going to have a huge advantage, obviously. It's also pretty much the closest you'll get to the cannon. And as you'll see here, you need to hit that weak spot, because every good invention has to have a weak spot. Anyway, you have to hit that weak spot to destroy it. And I'll explain about that when we get there. But basically, as I was saying, capturing that base will be extremely useful. So it's a good idea to try and get to it as fast as possible. Now, I'm setting an APC over in this direction because I noticed there was a base over there. However, something you might want to know. That base on that side is in range of the cannon, which means anything that comes out of that base is going to get shot at by the cannon before it has a chance to move, which is not good. So, you shouldn't really go for that base unless you're really confident that you're doing well. And here are recon units, which of course we haven't seen before, so Nell gives a tutorial on them. Now, recon units are very good to create early on. In the early game, when your opponent is going to have mostly infantry, recons are very good because they have high movement and they're effective against infantry. The problem is they're very, very ineffective against almost everything else, and tanks and even mechs will just utterly destroy them. I mean, if you get first strike on mechs, that's good, but just don't let them get too close. Now I'm moving this transport into position. Next turn it should be about right. Now I have excess funds here, so I can start creating tanks. Tanks are a good thing to get once you have access to them. And that happens whenever you move something into its range. Now here I'll explain how exactly the cannon works. The cannon will fire at the most expensive unit in its range and cause 5 damage. Now, this is interesting because, of course, now, as you'll know, most expensive doesn't necessarily mean most valuable. So, you can trick it into, for example, firing on a transport when the thing that's really going to be useful to you is the infantry that's capturing a base, for example. So, essentially, they're not all that smart, and it's easy to manipulate them. And I've got an infantry unloaded on that base, and moved the transport copter in to block off any enemy attempts to attack it. So, I'm pretty much going to get that base there, which is really going to help me later on. Still expanding my territory on the other side too. Always good to keep expanding out and capturing neutral properties. Of course, you should prioritize capturing enemy properties over neutral ones, because not only will you be adding to your income, you'll also be taking away from theirs. Might seem like I'm talking a lot here, but I just want to share a lot of these tactics I've developed through playing lots and lots of War Room and even a bit of Wi-Fi on Days of Ruin. A lot of these tactics can kind of help there too. Now, of course, infantry can't do much to tanks, so once you've started creating tanks, at this point now, in a more even match, the enemy would be having access to tanks now too, but as you'll see, this mission is pretty easy because Flak still can only create infantry. I guess they did this to sort of, you know, ease you into the whole creating units process, which you do need to learn because it's basically how you play a standard game. Now, if I move the APC into range of that cannon, remember that if an APC gets damaged, the unit inside is completely safe. So it doesn't matter if the APC is in range of the cannon.